everybody. Thank you so much for joining in today to talk about this. I'm mainly going to be talking about the NABat program in Alberta again for this year. I'm hoping that this can be a pretty interactive meeting. So if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to unmute yourself or feel free to add it in the chat as I'm going along. Anything can, like anybody can interrupt me. I'm happy to do that. And then we can kind of take it from there. So this is just a quick outline of the things that I'm going to cover today. There's a few folks that might be here in person or might be watching afterwards that are pretty new to the program. So I'm just going to quickly go over who we are, tell you a little bit more about bat news and what's going on in terms of bats. But the main chunk of today is probably going to be spent in the 2025 workflow. That's where I'm going to give you any updates on what we're doing with the data, how we're handling it, and how you'll be able to submit the data if you do want to be part of our study with the NABat program. Awesome. So first to begin with, I think most of you know now, but we are the new North of Northwest Bat Hub, which was established by merging together the previous Southeast Alaska, BC Bat Hub and the Alberta Bat Hub. And we have leadership from both the Alberta and the British Columbia provincial governments, as well as the state government of Alaska to make this happen. I'm part of Biodiversity Pathways, but the reason why I have the WCSC Canada logo up here is because they were the ones that were leading the hub based out of BC and Southeast Alaska, and they are still to this day giving me a lot of support for everything that we do. So I did want to have a little bit of time to give them a big shout out for that. Everything that we do kind of comes from that NABat program, the North American Bat Monitoring Program. So we follow their protocols. The goal at the end of this is to submit all of the data to them so that they have access to it, but also so that we have cool data that we can do some good analyses and trends analyses with. So when it comes to the NABat program, the reason why it got set up to begin with was due to a lack of information regarding our bat populations in the middle of knowing that there was these imminent threats coming in. So the big one that most of us are very intimate with and aware of is white nose syndrome. And it comes from the fungus of PD, right? So these are maps that I got from the white nose syndrome website. And as you can see, for our region, we actually didn't get white nose or didn't get PD, the fungus that causes it, until 2022. And it kind of came up both in Alberta and BC, really close in timing. But in Alberta, it's already kind of made its way across the province. And last year, we actually detected the first few bats that actually had the disease of white nose syndrome. So that's why it's so important now more than ever to continue these monitoring efforts, because we have pre-exposure data and now we need to continue to collect that post-exposure data to see how our bat populations are getting impacted. Now, on top of white nose syndrome affecting a lot of our kind of smaller bats, we also have this new-ish threat that's come up, and that is wind development, right? This map here is a database of all of the wind turbines across Canada that have already been built as of 2025. So this doesn't include the planned ones. So as you can see, there's lots of wind development. Even into the US, there's also still lots of development happening. And we know that wind turbines cause the fatalities of many of our migratory bats. So your hoary bats, eastern reds, and silver-haired bats are all getting hit by this very, very badly. And last year, CSIC actually assessed all three of those species and recommended that they be listed as endangered. We're still waiting on SARA to see when they'll get listed, but we're hoping that it happens relatively soon so that some legal actions can start taking place and people are kind of held to account for actually monitoring these other bat species. So it's under this general environment that this Bad Hub came into place. We're working with all of you guys, partners from across BC and Alaska. And really, our main goal at the end of the day is to have strong science that will help inform strong management and conservation initiatives, right? So to do that, what my job is here is mainly to support you in different aspects. So first with data collection and field information, so that's going to be a lot of this workshop is going to be just going over how to properly collect your data, making sure that you're sticking to those NABat standards, but also making it so it's more standardized across all of our partners so that we have good data to begin with. That also includes any extra information. I am happy to set up one-on-one meetings with individuals. If you see something here that sparks a question about your deployment, we can set up meetings, we can talk about it. Last year, I set up a couple meetings with a couple different groups to teach them how to kind of start from the get-go. So if you're thinking of adding a grid cell, or if you know of people that are interested in monitoring their area, let me know. I am happy to get people started from zero as well. The next thing that I do, and probably the biggest thing, is this side. It's the coordinating of the processing and analysis of the data. Because it's relatively easy for us to go out and collect the data, but now we actually have to process it and make sure that we can do something with it, right? It's not just a bunch of effort for nothing. So this is where the heavy part of my job comes into play, as well as with creating these trends analyses. The goal of this specifically for Alberta is that we'll have yearly provincial reports about what's going on with our bats. And that comes from everybody sharing their data with me and me putting in the hours that it takes to make these trends and making sure that they're actually valid and good. So I'm in the middle of this process right now for the 2024 data, and we're hoping to have a report out by the end of June. Once that's out and accepted, we can share it widely with folks. To clarify, this is kind of the first year that I've been in this position. So I'm not sure that for this first year, we'll have kind of all the trends set in place because we still have to go back on data from previous years and make sure that it fits and figure out all that beautiful stuff. But the goal is in future years, every year, we'll have some idea of what's going on with our bats. So this is our goals, lots of different ways that we can achieve it. But one of the big things that I really hope everybody takes away from this is that you guys are really kind of the base of this whole project and how important it is for you to continue doing the monitoring that you're doing. So to express that, I wanted to show you this map of kind of the region that the hub covers. These little squares here are the 10 by 10 grid cells that NABat establishes, right? So NABat created this methodology where they cover the whole of North America in 10 by 10 grid cells. And then they assign numbers to each grid cell, making sure that it's randomly stratified and spatially balanced. And then of those numbers, what I did was chose the top 5% grid cells that NABat considers to be important for monitoring so that they have that spatially balanced design. And if you see here, just for Alberta, we have about 340 grid cells that in an ideal world with all of the money in the world, we would be able to sample every year, year after year. Now, unfortunately, we're not in an ideal world. So this is more what the sampling actually looks like nowadays. So last year we sampled about 40 different grid cells. Some of these were new, some of these were old. There's plans to continue some of them, not plans to continue all of them, because we did have a lot of new cells that we were just piloting. But my goal with this is to show you that even just your one point, if it's a grid cell or if it's a single site that you've deployed, it contributes a lot of data when you consider how much space we have and how many more points we need for these trends analyses. So please, I wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for all the work that you're doing and continue to do. But to remind you that even if it doesn't feel like a lot, your data means a lot for this program and this process. and just encourage you to keep on going with it. And we can talk about different ways and stuff like that if you want to expand. But at the very least, keep doing what you're doing, pretty much. Awesome. So with that little kind of intro blurb, now I want to get into kind of the nitty-gritty of what I am hoping to see for the 2025 field season. So like anything for the field, the very first thing that we got to do is actually go out and collect those data. And I don't know about you, but to me, this might be kind of one of the top things of this work, right? Going out to these beautiful sites, getting a nice day out in the field and setting up these deployments. So we got lots of happy faces when collecting these data, which is great. But with that, I want to clarify some of the deployments. I know I've gone through some of this already in the past, but I'm just going to quickly overview what we're looking for in each one of these grid cells. So ideally, if you are collecting data right now, you're collecting it following at least one of the grid cells in NABat. Remember that any point that you put in the landscape is part of said grid cells, right? But ideally, you would have at least 2 points within a grid cell, 2 to 4, following these quadrants, right? So one in each quadrant so that you kind of cover the whole space of the grid cell as much as possible. And then you're recording for 7 nights minimum, because even though NABat says minimum 4 nights, we're finding more and more that if you do 7 nights, first of all, you make sure to account for bad weather days and stuff like that, so you still have lots of data to handle. But WCSC did a bit of work a couple years ago that showed that their species curves. So with 7 nights, you're starting to hit that plateau where we're actually recording all of the species present at that grid cell. So as much as possible, do at least 7 nights. You can do more, of course, if you need to or if you want to. So these 3 points represent those stationary deployments, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about those specifically. So when we're talking about stationary deployments, if you've deployed these in the past, the big thing to consider is that you want to make them the same or as close as possible to what you've done in the past, right? This just reduces the amount of noise in our data set so that when I start comparing across years, it's actually true. So as you can see in these 2 pictures, I've shown these before. They are the exact same deployment, but this little tree in the back has continued to grow over the years, which is really cool to see in the photos, but it just kind of shows you how well they've been about deploying in the exact same spot. So make sure you look back at your data, your metadata, pictures if you collected any, to try and match it up as much as possible. Now, with this example, it's also worth noting that if your deployment space has completely changed since the previous year, you are allowed to move your deployment, right? I know last year, some of you realized that the deployment that you originally had wasn't the best. So you can move them around to find kind of the best situation possible, but only do that if you are struggling with something. So for example, if this tree continues to grow and gets in the way, of course you can move it off a little bit so that the tree is not producing clutter all of a sudden. So I like to say 5 to 10 meters from clutter. Also try to avoid stagnant water sources, because that is a foraging area for bats, which is great, but then you start getting a lot of recordings, a lot of bats per recording. And we really want to aim for that 1 bat per 1 recording, because it really helps the auto ID software that we use to identify the species, but even more so the manual vetting process. And I will go into that a little bit more. So yeah, this is just my big takeaway, to try and keep it the same as much as possible. The next thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is something that I introduced last year a little bit, but this year I really hope that people can really get into it a lot more. And it's using Survey123 to submit your metadata. So there's the Survey123 app available on all kind of platforms. You can download it. And then that's where you can fill out all the information. So for any one of you that actually use that that app last year, your big reward is that hopefully you won't need to write as much into that field sheet this time around. Because what I'm doing is if you have a perfect match with your grid cell ID and your site name, you can input that. That's one of the first screens that pops up. And then the next screen will automatically fill stuff out based on what you had last year. So information about the general environment, how to get to your site, all of that will be pre-filled. All you have to do is read through it, make sure that it's still valid and still true. But hopefully that saves you a bunch of clicking while you're out in the field, and it'll make everything easier. And in terms, for me, it makes it really easy to keep track of what data I'm expecting to get and all of that information. So I really, really urge you as much as possible to download this app and use it to submit all of your metadata to me if you are going to submit your data to the hub. Within this Survey 123 field sheet, there's a bunch of different things that you have to fill out. Most of them are self-explanatory. Of course, if you read through it and you have any questions, let me know. But I want to go over specifically the photos and the clutter volume estimate. So for photos this year, what I want you to do is take at least 4 photos like the ones shown here. The first photo includes your whole deployment. Especially if you're on a pole, make sure you get the whole pole. And start with the very first photo pointing whatever way the microphone's pointing. After that, move 90 degrees, take a all the way step back, and take the next photo and kind of go in the 4 cardinal directions. Of course, it's not going to be north, east, south, west, depending on which way your microphone's pointing. But make sure you capture the whole setup rather than just kind of the open space, because this just gives me more of a reference of what's going on behind there. And if you weren't aware, when it comes to manual verification, these photos give us kind of the basis of how we're going to handle all of the data, because bats will act differently, different species will act differently depending on what the environment is like. So these photos are really important for us to have and know. So that's what I'm hoping to see in photos this year. The one thing that I wasn't able to really portray well here was the idea of using just landscape rather than portrait style photos. So that probably means you're gonna have to take a couple steps further back. But the landscape just gives me a lot more context about the space than the portrait mode does. So that's the only thing that I can't really portray here that well. The next thing that I want to talk about is the clutter volume estimate. So this is, again, another section in the Survey 123 that is asking you for how much clutter, aka how many things are in the way of a bat if they were flying through. So I like you to imagine that there's a big 50-meter dome that goes over top of you and the deployment with the deployment in the middle, and then guesstimate how much stuff is there. So this is not a perfect example because we don't know how far away stuff is in these photos. But if you look at these photos, you can see that there's a bunch of trees right behind the deployment and maybe a few shrubs kind of along the way at the bottom there, right? So based on that, my guesstimate would be that the trees maybe hit at about around here, and then you have a bunch of stuff kind of on the ground. So for this specific kind of deployment, I would say you could put 30 to 40% clutter volume estimate for this example. I know a few of you last year when you were deploying kind of had questions about what this actually means. So I just wanted to clarify that to make sure that everybody, if you're using Survey 123, that you know what's being asked of you. From that, I think all the other fields are pretty self-explanatory. If anybody here used that Survey 123 last year, it's going to be very, very similar to it this year around. And I will be sharing the link to that, to the Survey 123 when I share the link to the recording of this video. Any questions about that at all? Or about stationary deployments as a whole? Great. So moving on to the next thing. So we have our 4 stationary deployments, and if you have enough roads and capacity to, it would be great if you could also do these driving transects. I know a few of us are doing driving transects, which is great. What these are is 45 minutes after sunset in that same week that you have your stationary deployments up. You go with a car, have a microphone out the window or in the roof of your car, and drive at about 30 kilometers an hour in a relatively straight line as much as possible. And then that's how we can start counting the number of bats, because stationary deployments don't give us an idea on counts, they just give us an idea on occupancy, whereas these driving transects can start illuminating a little bit of that abundance measure or relative abundance measure. Last year, I also introduced this idea of the insect transect. If you still have that stuff from when you did it, please continue to collect insect transect data to this year. I will submit all of that to Jason in WCS because he's working towards incorporating that as a covariate into the models so that we can try and explain away more of that noise. So those are the kind of two main things that you will do when you're in the field, enjoying the beautiful places that you get to go work at. And after that, now this is where we have to talk more about, okay, what do we actually do with the data and how we're going to deal with it? So as the hub, what I can offer to everybody that commits to sharing their data openly with us so that we can create those provincial reports is I can run all of your data through 2 auto ID softwares. So we would run them through Kaleidoscope as well as NABat. So there are 2 great auto ID softwares. The only thing is if you're recording in zero crossing, and I don't think anybody here on the line is, it would only be one because one of the softwares only works for full spectrum recordings. But I can do that for you free of charge and send you back those data on that condition that you'll share the data with us as well. Now, as most of you probably know, auto ID has a high percentage of error rate. So we don't want to fully trust it, and as much as possible, we want to do manual verification. So if you have the resources available to do manual verification, I will strongly encourage you to do so. There's 2 ways that you can go about that. One is doing it in-house if you have people with the correct training and they have enough time to do it. You're more than welcome to do it. If you want to go down that way, please just get in touch with me to make sure that we're following the same standards for manual verification and ensure that I understand how you went about that, especially if you are planning on submitting those data to me and to the hub afterwards as well. The other option for manual verification is you can just get Sensor, aka myself and people within my office to do the manual verification for you. So whenever you submit the data, whenever you submit it to me, we'll just do the whole manual verification, include it in our report, and then give you back a little kind of overview of everything that you have. This does come with a price. We're not trying to make a buck out of this. We are a nonprofit, so we are just charging at cost for these services. And again, if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to kind of go down this way because it just makes it simpler. All you have to do is submit the data once, and then you don't have to think about it until usually in March, when I get all of that completed and I send off the reports to the appropriate people. So these are the 2 options that you have to deal with handling the data. And the next things that I'm going to go over is I am going to assume that you are submitting the data, even if it's not for manual verification, but at least to get it to run through those 2 auto ID softwares. And this is the second most fun part of this summer, which is going to be desk work, which I'm sure everybody is just as excited about as these 2 fellas are in the picture. So the big thing about this is really honestly, this is probably the most important part of this whole process is making sure you get me the data on time and organized enough that I can use it appropriately, right? So first, do this this whole part as soon as you collect those data sets. Even if you're going to collect multiple different data sets, whenever you get those SD cards from those recorders, put them into your computer, back them up into your computer, back them up into a USB as the data comes in, because it'll just be a lot easier on yourself. The other thing that I am asking of people this year is to follow this folder structure. So this is the folder structure that WCS established with the British Columbia Hub. And pretty much it just helps me run the data through a set of code so that everything kind of gets done relatively automatically. When I send the email with the recording, and I will also include the links to the Survey 123 forms and also a quick little description of what this folder structure is. But going through it now, the first little bit is the number. So this is your GRTS ID number that you get from NABat, aka your grid cell number for whatever grid you're looking at. Then you can put underscore and whatever nickname you have given your grid cell that you're working with. If you only have one site and not multiple sites per grid cell, then you might just call this whatever the site is that you're working with. Under the parent folder, you'll have individual folders for each of the sites within that grid cell that you've sampled. Again, with your grid cell number, underscore, and then put the quadrant that that site is at. So if you have your grid cell and divide it into northeast, southwest, northwest, southeast, just add it there. And if you have multiples in one quadrant, just make sure to add 1 and 2 afterwards. And again, if you have a nickname for it or any identifier that you personally use, you can add it afterwards. Again, another underscore and whatever identifier you have. And then these is where you would put all of the recordings that you got. If you carried out any transects, same thing, grid cell number underscore transect, and under that put 2 folders, because we usually say 2 nights of transects, with night 1 and night 2 in there. This is really going to help me move my process along significantly. And it should take you maybe 10-20 minutes, excluding the time it takes to copy stuff over. But when you consider that versus me doing this for 40 to 60 different people, it's 10 minutes for you, it's hours for me. So I would really, really appreciate anybody that's submitting data submitted in this sort of format. And then finally, the last folder that you would include there is site info folder. Make sure to put site info ahead of the number this time so that the code doesn't think that there's recordings in there. But this is where you would put any extra information. So photos, if you do use Survey 123, you won't necessarily have to put anything in here. But if there's anything else like that insect transects, if you took a photo of that and send it off, stuff like that. You can put all of this into a USB, or if you don't want to go through that, once you've copied all of your data, you can also send me the SD cards. Because for this year, what I wanna test out is if people just ship me their data, if we can make that process a lot easier. Because I know last year folks were using Wildtracks to submit some of their data, but there was some kind of struggles going back and forth with uploading the data and making sure it was all correct. So I've decided this year to simplify it for everybody, just get a copy of it with yourself so that if Canada Post loses it, we haven't lost all the data, and then ship me all the data. If you want to ship it through a USB, make sure you follow that folder structure. If you just want to send me your SD cards, make sure they're properly labeled before you send them to me. I personally really love coin envelopes. You can put your SD cards in there and in the front write your name, the site that you're working with. If you know your grid cell number, for sure add it in there. Any information that's important for me to know right off the bat that will help me organize the data appropriately. And then just ship it to me here. We used to be based out of the University of Alberta. We've just recently moved to a spot downtown in Edmonton. So if you shipped anything to me last year, make sure you update that to follow this address. But if for whatever reason you ship stuff to the U of A, I still have access to that mailbox, so it's not the worst thing ever or anything like that. So I'm hoping that this will kind of ease off some of the work on your side, so that you don't have to kind of be scouring through how to use WordTracks and stuff like that. So I see somebody is asking if they don't know their grid cell number. For sure, let me know. I can send you an email with that grid cell number. I've kind of have the grid cell numbers for everybody that submitted data in the past. And then we can go ahead that way. And that's how you'll know it. Again, if you just have if you have your nickname that you're using with that, as long as you keep the nickname the same, we can also kind of go back and make sure with that. But yes, I can give you numbers. My last thing about this, and this is something that we struggled a little bit with last year, is the timing of getting the data. Part of the reason why I want you to, as soon as you get your data, clean it up and send it off, is because I'm going to have this deadline of August 1st for getting all of the raw data. Or at least getting it shipped so that I have enough time to work through it all and then do the right amount of reporting that we need. This year, I've been very delayed on all of the deliverables because we kind of waited into later. And I will be sending a ton of reminder emails. So please get that on there. And if you decide to manually verify your own data, you have until January 30th to get me all of your manually verified data. I would still prefer that by August 1st, you just send me a quick list of how many sites you have and approximately how many recordings per site, just so that I'm aware and prepared to know how to deal with it. So all of the data that's on WildTracks from last year is still going to be there, and this is actually going to be on the next couple slides. I will still be uploading the data to WildTracks, so that is still going to be kind of the place to store and share the data. It's just it wasn't as simple of a place to get the data from you to me, especially when it's just raw data. But I'll update on that a little bit later on. So my last point on this slide is if these deadlines don't work for you, please let me know. Stay in touch. I'm going to be sending lots of reminder emails ahead of this time. If you still have stuff deployed or anything like that, I just need to know hard deadlines of when I can get everything by, and we can kind of adjust. But ideally, if you're following the NABat protocol, we say we want to get the data for the pre-volancy period, right? So late June is usually kind of you're hitting the edge there. So ideally, August 1st is not a bad time. So sorry, Clara, if we didn't record until mid-August last year, how would this work? Should we change our recording schedule to accommodate, even if it's not consistent? Yes, so Clara, I think last year it was a little bit later because you guys were just getting set up and everything. For the NABat process, we like to have those pre-volancy numbers. So if it is possible for you to go and collect those data before that, we can have a conversation about moving that ahead of time. If this is where we can have like that conversation of if that August 1st deadline is not going to happen, you and I can talk about it because I can receive data for that August period. We just need to make sure that it doesn't get pushed all the way into November because that's why all of my deadlines are being pushed back this year. So we can have a conversation about that for sure, Clara. Yeah, so pre-volancy, so that is before the young of that year are flying. That is usually, we like to say May until late June, early July, you might be pushing it a bit. It always changes and it depends on the species, of course, but that's kind of that perfect period to start deploying. Again, if any questions come up regarding these deadlines or these things, just email me and we can have a conversation about it. But assuming that everything goes perfect, you submit your data, that's the end for you, right? You don't have to think about it again until in the spring when I get my reports out to you and get that back. But this is also when my job is starting to ramp up. So this is my desk work number 2. So the idea is once I get all of your data, part of the reason why I need it so early is because I will go through it all, make sure things match up, make sure everything's where it needs to be. And that gives me enough time to go back and forth with you if there is anything missing, so that I have enough time to do all of that. But assuming that everybody here is going to go on survey 123 and everybody here is going to organize all of their folders properly, that's not what I will look like. I will be a happy person, happy camper, and we'll be good to go. I'll run everything through the 2 auto IDs, and then I will spend, well, maybe not just me. I'll get a few of us will spend time manually verifying everything. So I will have contractors that help with the manual verification. And we'll get this all going just in time to then get our analyses done. So this is what I was talking about before. Once we have all of those data processed, analyzed, and manually verified, this is when I will put it all up on WatchTracks and the NABat website so that you guys have full control of your data and can do with it what you need. And then also so it can be shared with the larger scientific community. Again, this has been delayed for me this year, just with the first year getting started up and everything, but I am aiming to get all of last year's analyzed and processed data up on both of these platforms before that August 1st deadline, just so that I'm not starting to overlap the 2 years. So I'll stay in touch with people as needed. But this is kind of the big goal at the end of the day, is getting that ahead of time. And I'm using the code that was developed by Jason Ray out of BC to look into the data itself, try to get some statistical trends. I'm working on that as we speak to see how exactly we're going to create these trends for Alberta, seeing that the way that we collect data here is a little different from the way that BC has collected the data. But the end goal really is those big reports, right? Because that's what, at the end of the day, everybody wants, is they want to be able to look at a page and understand what's going on with the bats. So this is part of the reports for BC for 2023. And as you can see, this is occupancy and relative abundance. And through the years since they started back in 2016, there hasn't been any significant change in those bat populations, which is great to see, but we actually needed almost 10 years of data to be able to start talking about those things. And that's exactly where we're going with Alberta. So this is for the provincial scale analysis. If you are interested in having something more specific to you or maybe to the people that you work with, get in touch with me because I can create these reports for specific regions as well. And we can start kind of informing people more and more about what's going on. And on top of that, I can also create little like grid cell level things even. So I can do to the grid cell or to the site almost, up to the region, up to the province. Would I want past year's data? It would be great, but I have to be careful about how much I commit to. Like I said, I'm still kind of in the middle of figuring out exactly my reporting situation for the province of Alberta. But if, for example, this is something that you're interested for your region specifically, and you want somebody to look through your data and do some reporting, let me know. Again, it would have to be a contract that happens with you, but we can do that for you. At the very least, I would recommend that you upload those data to WildTracks and upload them to NABat. I can't offer to do that for you at the moment. I can do it if you submit your data to the hub to be part of that larger report. But right now I'm going to say upload your data yourself, at least to the NABat website. And if you need support with that, I can help you, but I can't do that for you right now. But TBD. And then, so I was talking about, single sites, region, provincial, and then the reason why we also want to make sure that people get their data up on an NABat is because they're doing the continental scale analyses. So these maps were released last year. These are relative abundance for the big brown bat and the little brown bat here. And as you can see, we have a little bit of Alberta represented in these maps. But the reason why all of BC, well, not all of BC, like southern BC is well represented, is because of this very standardized process that they have. And again, similar to what the provincial scale reports were saying for BC, there doesn't seem to be much change in abundance for either the big brown or the little brown bat. So if we get better about making sure all of our data is up on NABat in a timely manner, as they start making these big reports and stuff like that, we will be able to see ourselves represented in those large reports, on top of the fact that we will have our own reports to go off. Awesome. So with all of that being said, I just kind of sped through the whole presentation, which is great. I can give you about half an hour back of your time. But if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the chat or feel free to email me, and we can start coordinating that. And last thing, like I mentioned, this will be available online. I will send everybody a link alongside descriptions of kind of the new processes that I mentioned during the presentation. And the links to the Survey 123 forms for you to use. Does anybody have any questions? And if not, thank you so much. And hope to see all of your amazing data coming in the next few months. Yes, Eric?
Hi, Cami, can you hear me?
Oh, I can, just not on my headphones, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks a lot. That was awesome as usual. Such a great primer on NABat and bat ecology generally. I'm just curious about those trends that have been generated so far, and if you can point me to reporting that sort of describes analyses and that sort of thing for that.
Oh yeah.
The
So
relative abundance and the occupancy and everything. I'm just really keen about all those metrics.
absolutely. So you can actually just go on the NABat website and they
Okay.
have all of the papers they published there. In terms of the BC report, I have drafts of those, but I would have to just ask kind of my provincial contact to make sure that we can share those widely. I would assume yes. But I can share the provincial to the smaller scale reports, and kind of that's the basis of what I'm trying to do with Alberta as well.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll peek at the website. I'm sure that'll
Mhm. And I
cover.
can add that link into the larger email that I'll send next week with all of that
Okay,
information.
awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks.
Mhm. And yeah, Julie, Survey 123 is an ArcGIS app. It's free for people to submit data to. So you shouldn't have to worry about like paying any extra stuff for it or anything like that. If there's no other questions, you guys are welcome to go ahead. Thank you again so much. I think this is a great project and I'm really excited to see what everybody has to share. Have a great one.